Let us now start out, as before, by way of first going for refuge to the three rare and precious ones and giving rise to the enlightened attitude, as well as contemplating our own teacher. There might be some who have just joined the course at this point who might not have heard the instruction on how in particular we contemplate our own root teacher above our heads. The description is as follows. We imagine how above our heads there's a 1,000-petaled lotus flower with a moon disk on top. On top of that sits our own root teacher, whoever he might be, with a radiating, friendly, smiling expression. He sits there and he regards all beings with objectless compassion, meaning compassion that is equally extended towards all sentient beings. In this way, we regard him to be sitting above our heads in this particular shape, and we think of him as the essence or the union of all rare and precious ones, of all Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, of all Lamas, teachers, etc. And then we pray to our teacher.
so Tani, Long Zawa Lama, Joe Somunima, Naranga, Yin, Verkado, Naya, Rangi, Yola Kuma, Sakata, Tatinji Uso, Saptatunga to the Johnson.
Having thus prayed to the Lama, we now imagine how he dissolves into ourselves through the opening, through the crown of our head, and how he slowly sinks down to come to rest at the level of our hearts. There, we imagine him to be sitting in the cross-legged position inside a 5-colored sphere of light that has the shape that is roughly egg-shaped and open towards the top. We have now reached we just move into now the 5th point, the 5th instruction from among the instructions of the 7 points of mind training. First 4 points we have already heard explanations about. Just to reiterate, the first of these was the so-called preliminary part. The second deals with the actual giving rise to the enlightened attitude itself, to that which we know bodhicitta, which we call bodhicitta, how to give rise to it, how to nurture it, how to implement it. The third point deals specifically with how to incorporate, how to bring onto the path whatever experience, whatever circumstance we might find ourselves in, particularly those of a negative nature, how they are to be made into a skillful means upon the path, and how to deal with any situation that we might find ourselves in. And the 4th instruction was how to make this training, this mind training, a practice for the duration of our lives, how to implement it in such a way that it becomes our main practice. And that included also instructions in particular on how to deal with the approaching death, and what to do when death is actually upon us. Now we move into the 5th part, which instructs us, or in which we will hear explanations about how to measure the extent of our success in the practice, how to make out for ourselves whether or not and how far we have progressed in this practice. Now, moving into the explanation of the 5th point itself, there is yet again a root verse of the author, Chakavayeshan Dorje himself. And in this root verse, this single line, it says, all Dharmas have but one single purpose. And the commentator, Jamgön Kongtrul Lodrö Taye, then continues to explain that all different Dharma teachings, whether they belong to the category of the lesser vehicle, the Hinayana, or the greater vehicle, the Mahayana, they have indeed a single purpose, which is to pacify, to decrease that idea of ours, that belief of ours in the existence of a self and everything that goes along with that. This idea, which is the root cause for all our troubles in the first place, has to be eradicated, has to be pacified, has to be done away with. That is the single purpose, the single intention of all different types of Dharma. And Jamgön Lodrö Taye continues to explain, saying that whatever Dharma practice we might have endeavored to perform, whether it be the practice of mind training or any other practice for that matter, the single intention of it, the single purpose of it is to erode our holding on to the idea of there being a self, to lessen, to decrease this idea of there being such a self and our clinging to it, holding it to be an important thing that by all means needs to be protected, etc. That is the single intent of whatever Dharma practice we have ever performed. On the other hand, he says, if that is not the case, if our belief in this self, in its existence, and our clinging to this belief has not been eroded, has not been lessened or decreased in any way whatsoever, well then whatever Dharma practice we might have performed was completely in vain. So if we were to examine ourselves in this way, exactly this would be the indicator that tells us about success or our lack of success in our practice. If our idea, our clinging to, our appreciation of this idea of a self has decreased, has measurably lessened, then indeed our Dharma practice has been successful. If, however, this idea has not lessened, if it has even increased, if we hold on to this idea, to the clinging to this self even more dearly, then indeed all of our practice has been in vain. Then we have just been wasting our time. It is like a scale in olden times upon which one puts various objects in order to measure their weight against each other. In this way, we can always use this one particular point as an indicator whether or not our practice was successful or not.
Dza Patrul Roja, Tonglen session, marriages. I rimbo la young, rimbo la song, that is in a young, Maruka Sana is a Chepan Doma, Mundu, Maranga, Yam, Badonga, Las of the Toka, my second Doma, Mundu. Jens and Jentam, Samba, Hinjim, Desi Kongtrul, Perkin Doma, Mundu, then Maruka Sana, Taki Gurus. Then Maruka Sana, Chepan Kayo, Munduna, Roja, Tonglen Sida, then Drive Young Tapa Mutaba.
There is a quote by the great Dzogchen master Dza Patrul Rinpoche, who has said, if upon examining your mind you find there to be no change whatsoever, then even 100 years of practicing in seclusion have been pointless. That says very much the same as we have heard already. If we practice, even in retreat, intensively for a long time, and there is no decrease, no diminishing of holding on to this idea of the self, of this self-appreciation, taking ourselves to be important, taking that self itself to be important, then whatever practice we have been doing for however long, in however much of a retreat or seclusion, has just been fruitless. We've just been wasting our times. On the other hand, if we examine our minds and find that we have become kinder towards others, that we do not hold this idea of a self so dear anymore, that we slowly let go of this idea, then indeed our practice has been successful. Well, occasionally we might experience situations, circumstances of great distress. We might all of a sudden be under the influence of a certain sickness, or we might experience pains, we might experience adverse circumstances of whatever type, or those near and dear to us might do so. Our families, our parents, our partners, good close friends might be struck down all of a sudden with a terrible sickness, or whatever sort of distress, might feel depressed about this or that, or whatever it might be. At this particular point, we would be well advised to put this training of mind training, these points which we have been taught about here, into practice. Then we should truly endeavor to practice the meditation of sending and taking, of exchanging ourselves for others, and of truly wishing to give whatever happiness, whatever joy, whatever virtue we have accumulated to others, while taking all of their suffering, pain, sickness, misery, and the causes thereof upon ourselves. This is the point, this is the kind of situation in which we can check ourselves to what extent we have already been able to truly train in this practice. This is exactly the situation in which we can, in which on the one hand we should definitely employ the means that we have been given, as well as check ourselves as to the extent of success that we have already brought about in such practice. Particularly when the moment of death is upon us, when it truly means to die, then we could proceed as we have already heard yesterday. Whatever possessions we have, whatever wealth we possess, we could mentally offer it to our lamas, to the three jewels, the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, either by way of employing the regular words of a mandala offering, or simply as a mental offering with our own thoughts, or with our own words, thereby making one good final use of that which we possess, giving it away to these objects of refuge, these objects of these sources of protection. If we have proceeded in this way, by way of having offered all of our possessions, etc., to the lamas and the three jewels, then we have performed the first step of freeing ourselves from whatever clinging there might have been to these objects. Then we can proceed to the second step, which is to actually distribute our possessions among those who might have some use of them. We could then think of our immediately close and loved ones, like our fathers, our mothers, our partners, our good friends, or, for instance, the hospital in which we might find ourselves, and give all of our possessions away to them, to those people who can make good use of them, for we cannot take them along anyway. Therefore, let's distribute them among whoever can make use of them. Having in this way then freed ourselves of all objects of clinging and attachment, we could give rise to the thought in our minds that we ourselves are not alone in this. All beings eventually have to undergo the suffering of death, with all the fear, with all the distress, etc., that goes along with it. And as we are about to do so, as we ourselves are about to die, we could think, may the fear and the suffering of the experience of death of all beings come to ripen within myself. May all of these beings become free of this fear and free of these sufferings and pains, and may they come to ripen in me as I'm about to die anyway now. And then, with this thought, we could then practice the meditation of sending and taking for a little while, again taking all the suffering, the pain, the causes thereof of beings upon ourselves, and sending all of our happiness and joy and virtue and the causes thereof out to others. And after we have done this for a little while, after we have concentrated upon our breathing in this way, we could then simply rest in the natural state, free of any reference point, free of holding on to anything, and then eventually in this state proceed to actually die. It is said that this is a very profound instruction. This is an instruction which surpasses all other instructions.
nunga semge chani kandi yo kron ta ha ko ma ne shi yo ma re te yan de ngarang na song no ton ang ne ngara ten din do ten ya pon do la so ten di sang tan da de lo jung ge chu du ba lo jung ge chi yang ta ba.
Concerning these ways of how we find indicators whether or not we are successful in our virtues doing our practice, Chakavayesha says, employ the two kinds of witness, or uphold the two kinds of witnesses, yeah, either yourself or others. We could go to others, those who are close to us, those who are familiar with us, who know us. Predominantly we could go to our teachers to be witness to our success or lack thereof, and could ask them about their opinion, whether or not we have progressed in our practice, whether our doing is indeed virtues or not. But how can we be sure that they are truly able to look into the furthest recesses of our minds? On the surface we can very well perform all kinds of deeds which seem virtues, which seem pleasing to others, which bring about happiness and rejoicing in others. But how can others, even our teachers, be sure that we do not perform such deeds only as kind of a competition with someone else, or only for selfish means? Therefore, the other type of witness that is to be employed is again ourselves. We ourselves ought not to delude ourselves. We ought not to deceive ourselves, but to be honest with ourselves. It is us ourselves and no one else who always knows at any given time, at whatever deed we perform, what is the underlying intention, what is the driving force behind that which we do. Therefore, we should at least be honest with ourselves, know by ourselves what it is that propels us forward, what it is that makes us act in such ways or in other ways, preferably in virtuous ways, and be honest with ourselves to such an extent as to see whether or not we are about to perform something for rather more selfish reasons or for truly altruistic reasons to bring about the benefit and welfare of others. So this is to be examined, or ideally this is to be examined by ourselves at all times.
Jamgön Kongtrul Lodrö Taye Sene tena yongdo chebe so nondo rongsan chudo manjibe Rootteacher Jamgön Kongtrul de Jamgön tense chube chongdo tense sene tena pe me an pe chuba pe na se yapo zindo samba tende ungre tengo taba denzindo tenibana ate yendo te chuba sene tena chuba namdo ndo songson de ngaruge sende chudo yang daban ri toyo mare ngaruge yang yang daban zi toyo mare lo jong yang daban gam toyo mare tera tene nye mumba tangji dror ke tene pena shedong dab kola pa beni ya mare tene da zi beni ya jingdong che zi chuben zongda da jing memba desin trina ngaru semla nyang ni xiu yo mare ba.
Concerning these points, there is a quote, a verse by Jamgön Lodrö Taye, which is contained in his famous prayer calling the Lama from afar, in which it says roughly, outwardly appearing as a pure Dharma practitioner, yet inwardly their minds not touched by the Dharma at all. This is like the snake of passions, which, when adverse circumstances come to pass, breaks forth. Which again explains very much as what we heard already. We might very well outwardly appear as pious Dharma practitioners, full of virtuous intentions, doing all sorts of Dharma activities to the delight of others, but inwardly our own minds may be hardly at all suffused with the Dharma. We may still be very rigid and very selfish in our inward attitude, yet we do not show this to anyone. And this is likened to this analogy of a snake that we have just barely been able to conceal, but whenever the circumstances appear and come together in an adverse way, then all of our anger, all of our hatred comes to the fore. We fight with others, we shout at others, etc., and so forth. And we show our true colors, so to speak. We show ourselves not to be touched by the Dharma at all, however much we outwardly make a great show of being a Dharma practitioner.
Then Genka Casa, Europe like Ganji Casa, Tranga Yorava, Kang Pop, then the Kang Pop, Tronga Chimosara, then Conga, then Refuge can, then Pa Salula, then Gamja, Olo, and then Gampolas. Then he said, Make touch it. Tungmo pemi yabuzuana song kang pemi pap tranga gas chesalo de young me party de unze or that yabudu. Then he come Tonglen cherry gas kang no and he did then he gamja then he met the guy then he go then that Tayabamu no mamma and part de Masaka Mutuka said, I don't doubt the Konarty. Pass of so very bad them pass. I don't
There is a story of the not too recent past of a Tibetan Lama who had a reputation of being accomplished in the practice of Tungmo, the practice of bringing about inner heat. And as was the case, he also had some Western students, or there were some Westerners nearby who had heard about this Lama and who were greatly impressed. And once, when the weather report predicted a lot of snow for the next day, they asked this Lama, and they said, well, could you please demonstrate this? Could you please, in the gear that is traditional, sit out in the snow and we could take some pictures? And this Lama said, yes, of course, my pleasure. And then, as is traditional for those who have accomplished inner heat, they wear a certain type of shorts and only another cotton shawl and nothing else. And as it was snowing then, he came out and he sat down in the snow, and that person, or possibly several of them, they came with their photo cameras, and as it goes with taking photos, the light is not right, so you have to take another shot, and you have to take another shot from another angle, and then you have to take yet another shot from the other side so as to catch the surroundings better, etc., and so on. And after a while, this Lama got rather impatient, and he shouted at them and said, like, get on with it. And again, they took a couple of shots, and apparently he started to freeze quite vigorously. He started to shake, and his teeth were shattering, and he kept shouting at them, get on with it, and yet the photos were still not done.
Yimu Mizi, I don't send that Dungan Mizi. And take Jim member don't Nasa Lazo, but Dungan Canton, the Lojung Troso, Rotabasi. Tene, that Tenda, Rotona, then Marula, Dungan Kan, Sanayo, Tela, Jitraton, Sam Pamba La Miziba, Yet Deva, Yet them Bahila, Gender. Another
quote of Chakawayesha Dorje says, at all times remain in a joyous state of mind. this is to be practiced, this is to be trained in, particularly in such situations when we find ourselves under the influence of adverse circumstances, when we experience difficulties, when we experience sickness or pain, mental distress of whatever sort. In such circumstances, not to be continuously depressed, not to be continuously distressed or in a bad mood because circumstances are not to our liking, but to remain in a joyful way, in a state of equanimity. This is what is to be trained in. And this also is exactly, yet another indicator for the measure of our success, for the extent of our having truly incorporated the practice, having truly gained a certain success in such practice. So this is yet another way how we can check ourselves. If in such circumstances we are able to maintain a joyous state of mind without minding the negativity that we experience all too much, then indeed we have progressed within our practice of mind training at least a little bit.
Ngaron samde yengdi yona da des pasun rona ngaron zane ma rong tu ma es gamba ya bo yo wa de ne de yengdo da ngaron zong da lo jong gong de gap jian de lo wo de jin nan ba che lang song xie dong jie gu ban zhao lang song cha dou jie gu ban zhao lang song de ne na sa shu qian bo de den di lang song lo wo de jin jiang na de lang song de ne song ju san ge lang de che to es.
And Shakawa-Yeshe Dorje continues to say, even when distracted, it is still an indicator for the extent of our success. Now, the example that is given here by Kongtrul Lodrö Taye is from the time when people were still predominantly using horses as a means of transportation. If someone is an experienced rider, then one might be riding along on one's horse, trotting peacefully across the plain for a long time without anything happening, and all of a sudden the horse might shy away from something. It might jump, it might take fright and run off in different directions. Nevertheless, an experienced rider will not be thrown off the horse. An experienced rider will know instantly how to deal with the situation, remain on the back of the horse, and then eventually rein it in and continue riding along on his way. This is exactly much the same situation as we find in someone who has practiced mind training for a long time. We rest in this state of equanimity and this peaceful state of mind regarding all phenomena and appearances and everything that we perceive as of an equal nature. But then occasionally something might happen, something might draw our attention, our focus upon itself, and this might in turn give rise to all sorts of ideas or concepts or emotions within ourselves. At this point, we will not be distracted to such a point that our mindfulness is completely lost, yet at the same time we will recognize that particular circumstance that has all of a sudden occurred for what it is, and simply remain in that tranquil, peaceful state of mind regarding all appearances and phenomena for what they truly are. Yet again, this is another indicator as to what extent we have succeeded in our practice or not.
다들 이보대 송주제 생존이 니소송 다인제 다 이보도 이제 그 공연장을 그게 공부제도 봐. 그 통지게 되는 님보대라 단진도 그래서 봐. 다 뒤는 누구요래서 대동제 방법이 이제 조어서 인게 대파파와 내장 나르게 산데 나랑게 따네 나랑게 산나 냐몽발라 소바탄 레미지파 테 나르게 산 pombo 조어서 제다 니 되네 나론 존나 동화도 쟁이 강성나야 테 송주 산도 로중가 랑도 쳇도비나 예대완 바예도 담 Tela Yichi, Ninja Jolas over Meziba, Eden Bajila, and Bajedon. Some. Then the lower getting and by Jona, Tala, Zakin Lat, and a combatant, Lanson Sonju, some round the tea yete, and Sonju San Jongi. Need the song that Sonju Lodung Yang Tapa gone top your back die. Jamgön Kongtrul Sherab, Membe, that end of the Jona, Mobile Rootteacher Kongtrul Lodrö Taye, Maris, some magic about the Rootteacher Yang the Labu.
Then further on it says in the text, these four are to be taken as indicators as whether or not our training in bodhicitta, mindfulness, etc. has truly been of success, has truly been incorporated into our beings. Now, to reiterate these four, which were there. The first of these instructions was to see or to understand, here are again the root verses, to see or to understand that all dharmas have but single intent, in which we were told that both the dharmas, the teachings and instructions of either the lesser or the larger, the greater vehicle, have but the single extent of lessening or clinging or hanging on to the idea of a self and eradicating this idea altogether. If this should not be the case, but rather clinging or self-appreciation should have become greater, then we have been told all training in whatever dharma would have been in vain, a complete waste of time. Then the second point, in the second point we were told to call upon two witnesses. Of course, the other witnesses, outer witnesses, such as our teachers or our Dharma friends, to hear from them whether or not we have become a more gentle, a more kind or considerate person is a good idea, yet they are not able to look into the furthest recess of our minds to truly judge whether or not our mind has truly taken on, has truly suffused itself with the teaching. Therefore, the ultimate, the highest witness are we ourselves. We ourselves have to be at least honest with ourselves in that regard, as to know whether or not we have truly made virtues doing our intent, as to whether or not we truly have incorporated the teaching within ourselves. Then, in the third point, we were told to, at all times, remain in a joyous or joyful state of mind, which is the instruction in which we are being told that at any given moment, no matter what adverse circumstances we might encounter, we should, if we are successful in our practice of mind training, if we have sufficiently incorporated into ourselves, we should be able to remain in a joyous state of equanimity without giving rise to all sorts of emotional defilements, obscurations, and even possibly letting negative deeds follow out of this. And then eventually in the fourth instruction we were told, the fourth indicator that we were given as to check whether or not we have been successful in our practice is that even when distracted, still the indication for the success of our practice will be there. This is the point in which we heard the analogy of the horseman, of an experienced horseman who, even after a long ride, while the horse was walking along peacefully, when all of a sudden the horse would shy away from something, such a horseman would still not be thrown off the horse. Equally, whenever we find ourselves all of a sudden in adverse circumstances, we could still maintain that equanimity, that peaceful, that aware state of mind. Nevertheless, it is said, even if these 4 points, these 4 indicators should truly indicate success of our own practice, this does not mean to say in the least that having brought about such signs of success, that we have reached the end of the path. They are simply indications that our mind slowly takes on that Dharma, slowly suffuses itself with that Dharma. Yet the path to the full awakening of complete Buddhahood is not finished by far. There still is a long and stony path ahead that has to be traversed, and therefore we should continue accordingly. Are there any questions concerning this?